Tom, you're one of my favorite guests to have on. Your consulting acumen, business acumen, and intersection with SEO is always, I think, a great highlight for our listeners. So thanks for coming back.
Thanks for having me back. I think the number of podcasts that have invited me back for a second episode, a smaller number. So I appreciate the opportunity, and always great to chat with you, Ross.
Yeah, I think I forget the title. We'll link to it in the show notes, but your pod on, I think I was getting executive buy-in, is one of our most listened to episodes, which you'd think just from the title, maybe is not the sexiest title, but clearly resonated with people in a lot of ways. So,
I mean, you say it's not a sexy title. For me, I have always geeked out and nerded out about the kind of business communication and organizational change side of the world. Like for me, I've long said, the barrier to getting SEO done is not knowing SEO, it's knowing how to get things done inside business, right? And so for me, this has always been the natural evolution of our entire industry and careers is like, if you can't actually persuade companies to do things, like, what are you doing, So, anyway, you say it's not an exciting topic. I say, let's go. I'm fired up.
Yeah, that's true. Clearly it was. I mean, there's no better time than now as well. Like that challenge has gotten more pronounced as we'll get into.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's good times out there, it seems.
I mean, good times out there. It's interesting times out there, like, that's for sure. It's an interesting world we're living through right now.
So, I mean, one of the core bases of this conversation that ties into that is you wrote this great post on input metrics. Few years old, but the ideas are evergreen, if not more pertinent today. So wanted to chat through exactly that post, which of course we'll link to in the show notes. But what is this input metrics idea, specifically in the context of SEO? And let's start there. What does that mean?
Yeah, I mean, this concept of input metrics comes from a lot of the work that Amazon did over the last 20 or so years. They kind of popularized this, what they called controllable input metrics, which is a way of reporting around operational activity that is important to the business and is a leading indicator of success, right? So some people also talk about this as leading indicators versus lagging indicators. The most kind of succinct and I think compelling way to describe this that I found is you can't steer a car by looking in the rearview mirror. But that's how a lot of businesses try and operate, right? You look at what has happened, right? You look at how many clicks did I get last month? How much revenue did I make last month? Like what happened last month? And then you try and navigate the world forwards and figure out what to do next. And you're driving by looking in the rearview mirror. And most businesses would be much better off trying to, obviously reporting on what has happened is important, but layering on top of that a set of input metrics, which are operational metrics about things that we are doing right now, things that we will do next, and things that are more directly within our control that we believe will drive future success, right? So, super simple kind of worked example of this is, imagine you're like an editorial publishing team, right? And one way to report on success is how many page views did our content get? How many conversions did that content drive? And so on. Another way to report on success is how many pages do we publish? How many pages do we update? And in this, you see in the screenshot, how many links did we build, right? And now these metrics are not perfectly correlated with success, right? You could write a bunch of content and it could not work. You could update a bunch of pages and it could do nothing. You could build a bunch of links and nothing could happen, right? So these are not perfectly correlated, but they're much more within your control, right? You get to know exactly how many pages you published. You get to know how many pages you updated and so on. And I think the core of this is, on the one hand, input metrics seem like a kind of a no-brainer, like a nice to have. It's like, yeah, of course we should report on like things we're doing, right? But the real kind of secret jujitsu move of input metrics is that it actually educates the business on what's important, right? So it educates the business on why are we doing these activities and which activities are most important, right? And when I worked, I was an independent consultant for 10 years. When I work with businesses, the thing that I would see time and time again is SEO teams who did not have leadership at those organizations that understood what they were doing, right? They didn't understand. They were just like, okay, we should do SEO. Like, what does that mean? What is my SEO team actually doing, right? What are we investing in? And I think it's a truism to say that executives don't invest in things that they can't understand. right? And so you need to make the work that you're doing legible, right? And input metrics is really this kind of methodology and framework for doing that.
Do you have, just from a waterfall standpoint, let's say you present a report to these executives, or I'm not sure exactly your preferred way of doing that. Is this like page 1 on there, the input metrics? Is it midway through? Like, what is the framing of this in the context of that larger, the output metrics as well?
Yeah, I mean, that will depend on the flavor of your individual organization. A fun fact inside Amazon, they have a weekly business review that they've talked about. There's a book, Working Backwards, that you can read that outlines all of this about the ways that Amazon works. They have a weekly business review where they review, I think it was a 400-page deck of metrics every week. And so there's a popular idea inside Silicon Valley in particular of like a North Star metric of like, oh, we just pick one metric and then align the whole company around it. Like, there's a fair amount of kind of, I think, debunking of the idea right now, today, which is really about saying the more metrics you have, the better in many ways, right? And the more that you can present those metrics in ways that are legible and understandable. So as a more direct response to your question is like, yeah, you got to look back at what's happened. So like revenue, traffic, clicks, and all those kind of metrics, but then also layering on a bunch of these different input metrics, right? It isn't just about a single one, but it's rather saying, here's the operational status for this project. Here's the operational status for this project. Here's how we're doing on these metrics, and so on. And I think that what Amazon figured out and what a lot of businesses have figured out is if you can make that reporting format consistent, the human brain can actually hold a large amount of data. Like you can actually skim through a large number of charts and data if the way that you're presenting that information is consistent and legible, right? Rather than being every new chart, you're like, what is this chart? What am I looking at? What does it say? And really getting specific on what you're reporting on.
Is there a consistent time? I'm sure it depends on the company in some ways, but I think of the output metrics and my gut is like some of those may be quarterly, they may be yearly. Input is that maybe it's monthly, maybe it's weekly. Do you feel like these have natural, like input is always the weekly, monthly, and then output minimum is the quarterly or yearly, or what's your thoughts on?
I mean, I think there are many teams that would love to not have to look at clicks and page views and revenue monthly, but would rather look at it quarterly, right? Because the monthly has too much variation in it. I don't think many businesses will get away with not looking at kind of output metrics on a monthly basis, but you can try. But yeah, you're absolutely right. Like input metrics, I think a minimum monthly, but oftentimes weekly, right? They can be literally like a drum beat of like, this is literally what's happening every month. And again, it will very much depend on the kind of the scale and volume that you're at, right? Depending on the kind of projects that you're working on.
Yeah, I'd be curious your opinion, just to give you a real world example for everybody. Hopefully this is tangible. We have a level 10 executive leadership meeting. We've just kind of gotten this off the ground. And within that, we have also every 2-month performance connections. I actually had an example of this being inverted, where most of the goals I naturally was skewing people towards were input metrics in both our level 10 meetings, which are every other week currently, and then also backing into that every 2-month goal. And someone correctly, or maybe not correctly, but noted from her company, great experience at Red Ventures, our new VP of PR, they pretty primarily did output metrics, like grow the department by 15%, by 10%. And my natural skew was like X pages updated, those kinds of metrics. But my gut was like, oh, in 2 months, can we really do that much in 2 months? Maybe that's a problem with the performance review design. Maybe I need to find some middle ground. But hearing that real life example, what would your response be on that and how we'd think about goal setting and those things? Yeah.
I think there's a lot of interplay between goals and kind of operational metrics. And I think goals often do get translated into outputs, right? And a lot of that is because if you cascade all the way backwards for like what the point of goals is, right? Most companies have a kind of a mandate to grow by a certain percentage, right? Or to hold EBITDA to a certain line, or to achieve some revenue growth target, right? In order to unlock a funding round or whatever it might be. All of the company goals will anchor to outputs, right? So at the end of the day, obviously dollars and profit is the real kind of yardstick. And so goals at the highest level often happen to correlate with that, right? You have to make sure that if you hit your goals, then you hit the revenue and profit targets that you signed up for, right? You don't want to hit your goals and then miss on revenue and profit. But within those high level goals, you need a way to say, well, this is how we're going to reach that goal, right? Because saying we want to grow profit 20%, or we want to grow revenue 30%, or whatever it might be, that doesn't have any explainability for how you're going to do it, right? So the next layer down from that full corporate goal is then, okay, well, this is how we're going to do it. In order to meet 20% growth in revenue, we are going to invest in our content production, and that will require 10 pieces of content a month. And then that becomes the operational metric that you can track, right? To say, okay, we're on track. We're hitting our 10%, our 10 pieces a month. And so we're hitting our operational metrics. And then it's a secondary question to kind of continually calibrate and be like, oh, okay, well, is that 10 pieces of content, does it seem like that is driving us towards the correct goal, or do we need to readjust, reevaluate, right? Is it not working for some reason, right? So there's always this interplay. Like none of the reporting on input metrics kind of removes the reporting on outcomes or output metrics. It's more so just, it's like an and, right? Like you also need to understand what is the organization actually doing, right? And I think the failure that a lot of SEO teams and projects make is that we have so many output metrics, right? We don't just have revenue. We have clicks, we have rankings, we have like all of these things that you can build reporting around. And so it's quite easy to build what seems like a kind of fairly involved, fairly comprehensive dashboard, but where every single metric is basically an output metric. And there is zero reporting on what are you actually doing, right? What is the operational work that is happening every month, right? Now, part of the reason for that, to say it out loud, your operational metrics don't live in GA, right? So I think a lot of especially more junior teams struggle with is they don't realize that you're allowed to make up your own metrics. They don't realize that at a corporate level, reporting on number of pages updated or number of pages published or number of pieces of content that have a video embedded or whatever that kind of specific operational metric is, tracking that metric and reporting on it, even if that means building a spreadsheet to do so, is a perfectly valid way to then drive all the way up into your corporate reporting.
I imagine doing this on a consistent basis also makes it fairly easier to get more budget when it feels like, oh, we did 400 pages over 3,000 words. That did move revenue. If I've been communicated that over several cadence meetings, it'd be pretty easy to be like, oh, can we just double that number? I already have that education.
100%. Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of what I mentioned before in that kind of like jujitsu move of input metrics is it's a reporting tool, but it's actually a tool for getting budget and buy-in, right? It's like if you can help other executives across the organization understand, well, where are my dollars going? Right? What is the activity that those dollars actively drive? And then what is the connection between the unit economics? So it isn't just like, hey, I spent $40,000 with the content team and got a bunch of page views. It's more so I spent $40,000 and I got 12 pieces of content, 4 videos, 2 infographics, whatever, right? And so then it's easy for an executive to be like, oh, okay, cool. So like if I spend $80,000, back of the envelope, I can get this much out of that, right? But and that sounds incredibly straightforward, but it's astonishing to me the number of teams that don't have that kind of unit economics at their fingertips, right? And then instead are looking around being like, I wish SEO had more budget. Like, look at the paid team. They got tons of budget, right? But actually like until you can make that unit economics legible, right? Executives aren't going to give you any more money,
I mean, that's a very core natural structure that comes with paid is you put something in, you get something out. And if there's not as much of that clarity of connection with our organic work, that's pretty problematic,
right?
It seems. Obviously, it's not ever going to be the same, but it can be closer if you're using that structure.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of situations also where organic teams are kind of frustrated where they want change to happen, but they haven't actually converted it into a way that the organization finds legible, right? So you might meet, for example, a team that says, like, let's imagine an e-commerce company, and the SEO team is saying, well, I wish our product pages had descriptions on them, right? And yet it's astonishing to me the number of teams that are sat there and haven't done the like the business modeling exercise of like, okay, you want a unique description for how many products? Like, okay, 4,000 products. Okay, so unique description is, $200 worth of work. So $200 times 4,000 products equals, right? And then you add on some management because we need a project manager to oversee that. And then it's like, that's like a business case, right? That you can say, this is the amount of resources I need. And instead of just kind of throwing their hands up and being like, I wish we could write unique descriptions, but nobody wants it, right? Business isn't interested. And you haven't made a case, right? You haven't actually done the kind of business math,
Yeah, makes sense. And on that note, is there any kind of real world example where you've implemented this and it saw some solid outcomes?
Yeah. I mean, I'll use my day job. I work at Raptive right now. We are a kind of creator monetization platform. We work with about 6,000 sites across the open web in a bunch of verticals. And I oversee the audience growth team at Raptive. And so we are trying to drive incremental page views across those 6,000 sites. But these are 6,000 sites that we don't control or own, right? So we have a partnership with these sites and they turn to us for advice and guidance. And we have a dashboard that creators can log into and get some advice and data and so on. But we don't fundamentally own or control these sites. And so for our teams internally within Raptive, we're implementing an input metric set of reporting to basically be like, okay, well, the thing that we are holding ourselves accountable for is creator behavior change. Right, we want to count the number of creators who have changed their behavior because of advice we gave them. Right, to try and because that's basically the set of creators we can take credit for. Right, we like a creator that went up or down in traffic, but not because of anything we said. Like we shouldn't be taking credit for. Right, we should be taking credit for other creators who have followed our advice and as a result of that seen increases. Right now, in order to drive creator behavior change, we have to do a bunch of activities. Right, so we have to do things like launching tools inside the dashboard. We have to do education, right? We have to do outreach to these creators. And so those are the things that we're building input metrics around. So we're building input metrics around like operationally, what are we doing as a team that are the things that are measurable, have unit economics associated with them so that the Raptive can invest, right? And then how are we holding ourselves accountable to make sure those things are happening? And then eventually, obviously, we have to connect that back to page views, right? We have to connect that back to like, are we driving incremental page views for the Raptive network, which is ultimately how both our creators make money and then by extension we make money. And so that's obviously kind of like the end goal. But we don't just try and look at page views and revenue directly because it's too abstracted, right? There's too many questions of like, well, how many page views did we drive, right? How were we helpful, right? Like page views went up or they went down, but like why, right? Is kind of the question. And so input metrics is a framework that we're using internally to kind of answer that value equation, to be able to kind of say, okay, like these are the things that we're doing. Raptive is investing in dollars in audience growth, and they're investing those dollars into these behaviors, right? And then that becomes more legible to the organization to understand, like, okay, great. If I put more dollars in, what do I get, right? Which is really like, again, it sounds basic, but again, just to stick with a real example, I've been at Raptive almost exactly a year now. I would say it took about 9 months to get to a point when we felt like we had input metrics like starting to be in a spot that we could actually kind of rely on and use. And so just to give a sense, it's like, again, most organizations that I've worked with in the past as a consultant, but Raptive is a good example. When you first step into an organization, it's very common that your analytics is not in a spot where you wanted it to be. There's a bunch of holes in the data you got to go fix. There's new data you want to collect that you don't have yet. And so all of those things need to happen just to get to a point where you can start to like, put this business model together and use input metrics and so on. So it's a whole journey. One of the interesting things as part of that Amazon talks about in this book, Working Backwards, is input metrics as a framework should be designed to evolve over time, right? So in the book, Working Backwards, they give this great example of evolving the definition of in-store products, right? So initially they were like, okay, how much traffic did we get to product pages on Amazon, right? Because they were basically like, that's what we want to do. And then they were like, okay, that isn't the best metric, right? It's not fully controllable by us, and there's a lot of different kinds of products. And they evolved it to how many page views did we get to products that are in stock, right? Because they felt that that was more relevant, more closely tied to revenue, and also slightly more controllable because they can understand things that are in. They can control what's in stock slightly more directly. And then they evolved that to how many page views did we get to to product pages that are in stock and available for 2-day shipping, right? And so they kind of narrowed this definition down over time to be something that felt increasingly controllable and increasingly kind of correlated to what they were trying to achieve. So not just measuring everything because they could measure everything, but trying to measure more directly like a metric that actually kind of correlates with activity. And so I think that's a good reminder that there's a lot of, I think a lot of natural instinct with executive level reporting in particular to hold it constant, right? There's a lot of, there's kind of strong desire to kind of be like, we should set up our reporting and then we should keep it the same so executives constantly see the same thing every month. And there's a certain truth to that. But at the same time, for input metrics in particular, there is a natural evolution of these things, right? Which I think really makes sense where instead of just being like number of pages published, you can say, okay, but that's actually pretty variable. What we really want to care about is number of pages published over 4,000 words with a unique image, right? And so let's measure that. And like that, maybe that's pretty well correlated with number of pages published. But again, the jujitsu move here is that if that becomes the metric, then executives start to think, oh, so like images must be important and word count must be important. So like that frames their value judgment of like what's going on, what's important, how do we invest?
Yeah, if you just kind of looked at this at a surface level, you may think number of pages published, I could just go to AI and publish 1,000 pages. Hopefully they think deeper in that.
Right.
But that image side may kind of correlate a little better with actual quality of those pages.
Yeah, wow. And I think that's really like the essence here is like you want to try and map these to things that actually matter, right? The point of input metrics is not to kind of put lipstick on a pig of like, pay lip service to like something that we're doing. It's more so like, no, we really want to measure, are we doing the things that we believe will drive future success? And so we should be as best as possible trying to make sure that the things we're measuring are the things that actually drive future success, right? They're not just empty calories or empty page views,
So for these metrics, kind of like maybe a VP owns that organic revenue number, and then generally you'd kind of distill that down to a chart such as the one we're looking at with a lot of different input metrics by department. Do you have any general guideline of like there probably should be one metric per person and one person owns that metric? Is there too many of these input metrics to the extent that we're saturating those, or any other thought process on that kind of individual ownership part of the house?
That's a great question, and something that we struggle with a little bit here at Raptive. Actually, I mentioned that kind of journey of putting these input metrics together. A lot of what we wrestled with was having too many to begin with, right? We kind of like threw the kitchen sink at it of like, here's a whole bunch of stuff we can measure. Turns out that's a lot of data to consume, and like there's a lot of like, well, why is this number up and that number down? And like, is this going well or not going well? Like it's kind of hard to see. And so we have, after that initial kind of metric sprawl, we tried to sharpen in and do a little bit more of that. Like, which of these metrics do we really believe is best correlated with success and most representative of the work stream? To answer your kind of ownership question, like I think there's kind of two ways that input metrics goes wrong, right? Fundamentally. One is if you're measuring things that have no activity against them, right? So for example, if you're like measuring number of pages produced every month, but you don't have a content team.
Oh, yeah.
Then it's like, well, why are we measuring this thing? It doesn't correlate to any activity, right? The other problem is if you're doing a bunch of work that is not reflected in the input metrics, right? So for example, you actually had it on the previous slide, but things like the number of tests we ran this month can be a great input metric, right? It's like, it's controllable, right? We get to decide, it's an operational thing. We believe that running tests drive future growth, et cetera, et cetera. But that would be a classic case of like, if you're more set in the kind of classical metrics mindset, you might not put like number of tests we ran as a metric, but then that would make that testing work stream invisible. Right? For executives, they would have no understanding or no legibility to understand that every month people are going in and they're running title tag tests or they're running A/B tests or whatever it is. And so again, like the two failure modes are either reporting on things when no activity, there's no resourcing planned or we have no projects planned, or not reporting on things where we have activity happening, right? Again, input metrics, I think a guiding principle is like, if you look at the input metrics, it should essentially show you where are we spending our money, right? It should be a kind of a complete view of like, where is all the effort going, right?
Yeah, makes sense. We had a monthly scorecard that kind of backs into this level 10 idea. And I originally it was like, oh, these are all the important metrics we have. And then over time, we ended up with like 45 metrics and we weren't acting on any of them. And then more recently, we distilled down into a monthly scorecard that's like 3 metrics per person. And even that might be a lot. And then the goal would be, if you're a manager under that, maybe you have all of your input metrics on a sheet that are actionable, but we don't have 50 that we talk about as directors or senior leadership that are pertinent, because it's just, we're never going to be able to act on that necessarily. I don't know where I'm going with that exactly, but just, yeah, that idea of kind of input metric bloat was a place we got to. And then maybe at the executive level, should be output metrics for the most part, but be able to distill down. But maybe not. Maybe you're saying we need to. Ideally, we could dig into the input metrics a little bit at the executive level with things like what you're describing. Is that fair to say? Or
yeah, I mean, just to like use Siege Media as a kind of case study here. Like at the executive level, obviously, I imagine you care about like a new business pipeline metric, right? Like how much pipeline do we have? How much are we closing coming down the pipe? Warm, whatever, nurtured. Those are all outcomes. So you want to report on those for sure. But I would imagine that you would pair that with, okay, well, like how many outbound emails did we send for sales meetings? How many like conferences did we do this month? How many podcasts do we do this month? Going to show up in your input metrics. Because presumably doing those things you believe drives pipeline. Right. And so again, I think to your point of sprawl, if you throw the kitchen sink at it and you're like, well, here's a whole suite of metrics of like number of blog posts, number of tweets, number of Facebook messages, number of emails sent, blah, 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 like it's kind of hard to know what's important. And so over time and with some strategy and with some expertise, you would hope you narrow that down to like, okay, the things that we think really drive pipeline that we really do want to care about are the following 4 metrics, right? Or the following, 5 metrics, right? Whatever that those things are. But I think you, as an executive team, I would strongly encourage you, if you're not, to try and figure out what those metrics are, because otherwise looking at pipeline merely just shows you like kind of where you are, like pacing, but it doesn't help you know what to do next, right? It doesn't give you that predictive power of like, well, how do we invest more in pipeline generation?
Yeah, it makes sense. And one of our challenges, and probably is like, we were talking about this briefly, is like, do you have an owner of that thing that exists? Do you have enough resources to own that metric? If not, maybe that metric shouldn't be there because no one can act on it currently. Right. Or you need to invest in that metric in some way. But that's all good stuff. Like for people who are not at the executive level, I mean, I think of 2 scenarios. Maybe it's like manager level person, or biasly an agency. Obviously, a lot of people do know they need 4 posts or link building or digital PR as an input metric. Are we consistently, they roughly know we're doing X posts a month or 10 links a month, I would think. And then vice versa, if you're can't speak to the executive, how do you start that communication of the value of this thing and that communication structure to not get them immediately being like, why is Sally telling me we published 3 posts? All I care about is that revenue number.
Right.
If that makes sense. Like, how do we make that journey?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think a lot of it starts with translating things that you want to do, like things you think are important, into operational kind of timelines, right? So a classic example of this in SEO is like an SEO audit, right? Which, by the way, I hate. I just put my hand up saying it out loud. I hate that culture of like audits, and I've railed against that a little bit in my newsletter and so on. But it's a kind of classical failure mode to be like, I'm going to sit down at a moment in time, do an audit, and then compile a kind of a list of tasks, right? Almost like, okay, we need to like fix our schema, we need to like, add images to content, like whatever the things are that you're identifying. Every single one of those recommendations should be able to be translated into a kind of unit economics, like what needs to happen in order for this to be live, right? To be done, and so thinking in that mindset enables you to translate we should fix something to like, we should do X number of something, or like we need to do, there's 200 product pages, we need to do this 200 times, or we need to do this for every piece of content we create, and we're currently creating 10 pieces of content a month, right? Like whatever that kind of unit economics is. And then what that allows you to do is it allows you to translate your kind of point in time SEO audit into a every month value statement of like, well, here's how we're stacking up. Like, here's a number of product pages that have schema fixed, and it's like zero. But like, if you report on that every month, then you're signaling that in your reporting, right, or as it goes up the chain, that this is a thing that matters. This is the thing that's important, and it's a 0 right now. And so we are continuing to recommend that this is not 0 and that number should increase. And that kind of like, it's a fairly subtle shift, but reframes that like frustration, reframes that frustration of like, well, I told them to do it and they didn't do it. Which is like what do you do then, right? Like every SEO has been in that situation. Like SEO is hard and complex and cross-functional, takes time. Instead of just like telling the company that they should do it once and then giving up, you should find a way to kind of embed that in some kind of ongoing reporting framework to be able to be like, well, this is a thing that's important and we still haven't done it, right?
Yeah, you made me think it's almost like a variant of the scorecard idea. Like you could have a scorecard that says, we had this goal of increasing traffic or value by 100K, and we need to do these inputs, and we track where we stand today against those inputs. And obviously we could also see where it's tracking, and maybe that would also communicate if we're above expectation. Maybe suddenly they'd ramp up those number of inputs in that kind of scorecard, even externally. Does that seem reasonably tracking?
Yeah, totally. And I think it's just that kind of like relatively simple idea that I think you take for granted as you get more senior inside an organization, which is that everything runs on metrics. So when you're lower down in an organization or you're not exposed to a lot of executive level reporting, it's not really we should do this thing or we should not do this thing, right? Or this thing's important, this thing isn't important. It's like everything in the business gets translated into okay, in May, what was the number? Right? What was the number in May? What was the number in June? And so you're going to translate these things into metrics, right? That's like, and so like, it's that kind of, back to that point where I said you can just make up metrics, right? You can define your own metrics for like, simple things like number of A/B tests we ran this month, right? And you could just log that over time. Or it can be more complicated things like number of pages published over a certain word count or whatever. But like whatever behavior you're trying to drive, like turn it into a thing that can go in a spreadsheet, right? Don't turn it into a thing that can go in a like red, yellow, green. Because I think red, yellow, green is like, that's fine for a kind of project management status and could be fine for like data communication. But red, yellow, green isn't a kind of executive level, right? They want to see a number, right? You need to be able to translate that into a like, we did 45 this month, right? And we did 35 last month, right? And you could have an associated red, yellow, green, right? You can be like, our target is 50 and we're at 45 or whatever. But like, if you haven't fundamentally got a number there, like you kind of lack the ability to be compared side by side with other operational things that are happening inside the business.
You turn my brain on because literally our scorecard is red, yellow, green with a number in there. So I think we're hitting both a little bit, but super interesting. One of the things that I think is a natural evolution, it couldn't be 2025 if I just don't say the word AI 30 times in a podcast. But I guess you agree, the state of attribution is getting muddier and muddier. So the confidence interval of what your input is going to generate in terms of output is, at least from where I'm standing, one of the hardest moments we have right now. So there's probably an element of, if you communicate input metrics enough and the output doesn't come, that is confidence eroding. How do you think about that this year? How would you think other people should think about that as we move forward in this kind of evolving analytics state we're in?
Yeah. I mean,
he's just sighing and shaking his head.
The narrator just comes in as podcast host, sighs and shakes head. It's a weird time, right? AI is radically reshaping a lot of different things, but AI search in particular and SEO in particular, in terms of, like there was a great New York Times headline recently, which was like the recession is everywhere except in the data. And I think it's a little bit similar. Like I don't think page views are actually nearly as bad as you would imagine if you kind of scroll LinkedIn for a little bit. But the executive level confidence in page views, like executive level confidence in SEO as a channel is like radically
Low.
reshaped, right? And I think with good reason, right? Like I think we're all looking ahead to kind of what's coming, and AI search is obviously going to radically reshape a lot of things very fundamentally. So you're absolutely right. I'm not trying to hedge the question. Measurability and attribution are going to get much harder, right? I think that is fairly uncontrovertible. In a world where measuring on outcomes is, your metrics are going down, right? Paid clicks are going down, right? Year-over-year comparisons look bad. And in a world where you can't even necessarily tell what was branded and what wasn't branded, and like, all kinds of things like that can kind of go away, observability goes away. Then input metrics are more important than ever, right? An ability to be able to measure progress on things that you believe drive outcomes has to be the way that you do reporting, right? Because if all you're reporting on is the outcomes, like, that's not gonna, it doesn't give you any ability to invest into a channel, to hold yourself accountable, to be making forward progress and momentum. Now that said, to your point, Ross, like, yeah, if you report on a bunch of metrics and like outcomes don't happen, that erodes confidence. And so like, there's no easy way kind of around that in a world where everything is changing, right? Except to say, one of the nice things about input metrics, and I actually didn't talk about this in the article that I wrote, but it's kind of a related, but I think important point is, a lot of input metrics are easier to benchmark than outcomes, right? So to say that another way, right? Imagine that you're reporting on number of pages published, right? It's very easy to see the number of pages that your competitor published. And so you can benchmark against them and be like, well, at least we're ahead of them, right? At least we're ahead of the industry average, or ahead of our 3 competitors, or ahead of our number 2 competitor, whatever the clearest comparison is. And so like maybe our page views down and maybe their page views are down too, but we're still doing better than them, right? We're still outpacing them in terms of production, quality, whatever it is that you want to measure on. And so I think that really, again, is like the foundation of, especially in 25 and probably most of 26, like we got to be measuring on things that we can measure, not whatever is going to happen to AI search and all the different platforms and all the different things, which, by the way, is not like, yes, we have to report on those things, right? And everyone's going to do a lot of good work over the next 12, 18 months, I'm sure, in terms of like measurability of AI mode and measurability within ChatGPT. And there's like a million LLM, kind of rank tracking tools popping up every day. Like, of course, all of that stuff's going to be a piece of the puzzle. But a lot of that, again, is all in service of measuring outcomes, right? Which is important, don't get me wrong, right? But we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that what most businesses care about is operational metrics. They care about, like, can I invest in this channel with, deliberateness and predictability and knowing what I will get when I invest into it, right? And that's the piece that is going to remain important.
Yeah, makes sense. That's great advice, and agree. I mean, normally I would like not too heavily. I know every business thinks about their competitors, but not lean in that direction. But it's a time where it makes sense, unfortunately, at least for the medium term, it seems like, to show you're still doing a good job.
Yeah, and again, this is kind of tangential to input metrics, but like, I think best practice is like, you got to pick your competitors wisely. Right. So when we talk about competitive benchmarking, it doesn't necessarily mean you and the one company that you care about, right? It can be like industry wide, right? So it could be like, okay, like imagine you're like a B2B SaaS company and you're like, well, we're producing more content than your average Series B B2B SaaS company, or whatever that kind of benchmark might be. It doesn't have to be just like us versus that one company that the CEO cares about, right? Like, you can get more sophisticated in terms of the way that you measure and benchmark the operational side of the house too.
Yeah, it's kind of macro rather than micro. Joe is killing me kind of thing, and maybe not be the safest for sure. So it's been 2 years since you put this out. Is there any kind of, I mean, we just touched on probably one evolution, but anything you would have changed or updated about that, or what's new in your thinking?
Yeah, if I was going to write an update to it, which I probably should, would probably be based on really kind of this like firsthand experience at Raptive of kind of the I don't want to say difficulty necessarily, because it's not necessarily like big P problems, but more so like lowercase p problems of kind of like, how do you actually do this, right? And recognizing that it takes time, right? Like I said, it took us about 9 months to really feel like we were starting to kind of crank the wheel on this. And so I think helping bring that to life for folks, I think would really help them understand that this isn't something that's so easy to do like month to month. You can't just like flip a switch and be like, okay, great, I'm going to do input metrics next month, right? Like, you got to get your data quality, you got to like figure out the metrics, like you might have to invent some metrics, like you might have to start tracking things by hand over time, like just a bunch of things that you might have to control for to kind of put new reporting in place and kind of recognizing that doesn't come for free, right? Like that isn't like something that you just get like the luxury of doing overnight. That would probably be the kind of case study that I write that kind of pairs with the original post that I think was mostly kind of like theory and kind of like the fundamental concept itself.
Yeah, makes sense. I agree. I mean, I keep going back to the theme of what's top of mind for me right now. One of the things we're doing is like setting a 3-year plan to the extent we can, and then distilling it to a 1 year.
Good luck with that in today's environment.
Yeah, thank you. And then distilling it to a 1-year plan, and then these bi-monthly goals, potentially the scorecard. And like, as part of what we're doing with the scorecard is we have executive leadership. We want to get them acclimated to those core output metrics and then bring that to their team. So it's almost, we have the offsite in 2 months. We're prepping for those 3-year goals 2 months in advance. And then we'd implement probably several months after that. So like the team will not see input metrics for probably half a year. Maybe I just move really slow, but for a big human organization, it feels appropriate.
Yeah.
And I could be wrong, but
no, I think you're absolutely right. And I think that's kind of like the recognition of how hard this stuff is to do, right? And especially like you touched on it right at the end, like it isn't always the data problems that get in the way, it's the human problems, right? You need to get a bunch of people in alignment, you need to get a bunch of people's input, you need to make sure that it's representative of the work that's being doing. I think I wrote this in a blog post on my own personal blog on tomcritchlow.com a while back, where I was talking about like why are executive dashboards so bad typically? Again, based on a lot of my consulting work over the years. And one of the reasons I think is that input metrics are not neutral, right? So reporting on outputs is easier because it doesn't make people as emotionally invested, right? It's like, right? Like it's we're reporting on clicks and revenue, of course, like that's like black and white, right? Everyone, like no one would disagree that we should report on clicks and revenue, right? But when you're suddenly like, okay, how many pieces of content over 4,000 words did you publish this month? Somebody can be like, well, wait a second, like I didn't do as many because I thought they were higher quality, so I did less. And you're like, okay, but that's a debate we should have. And so like the input metrics are not neutral in that way the output metrics are. And so I think part of the reason why they're harder is because they're messier, right? Is because humans are involved and you have to get people to agree that this is representative of what we believe is success, right? And again, I think a lot of folks in the SEO world, like especially on the editorial side, for example, there's a lot of folks who would hang their hat on content quality, right? There's a lot of folks who would say like, you got to write high quality content with not a clue in the world of how you would measure quality.
Funny you're speaking to the choir on this. We literally just implemented a CSAT score. We both have NPS score collection, which is relatively new for us, amazingly, 12 years in for our clients. And the secondary piece that we're implementing is in our drafts, asking for a 1 to 10 review on writing quality and also design quality. So now we actually can grade at scale what quality, at least from the perception. Of course, we need diversification across several client types. Maybe the client's just grumpy, we're just grumpy, those kinds of things. But that's our hope for measuring that ambiguous part, because we'd have people in the past who would be like, I'm doing great, Ross. Why aren't I getting promoted? But to us, we felt that clearly the work was not up to the standard. And now hopefully we have more quantitative pieces, which not every person can do, but on our agency side, asking for that score in a simple click a button way will hopefully kind of help us aggregate some input. But there's some fear. There was some immediate clenching up from everybody, understandably. I kind of, on my side, was like, we're going to take that feedback too. Give me feedback on everything we're doing quantitatively. Then maybe that helps, but that's some of the stuff we're working on that.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds great. I'm a big fan of that kind of measurement, which is like, kind of put your money where your mouth is. Like, okay, if you think quality is important, we got to find a way to measure it. Right. And so like, you can't just sit there and say it's important without some way of like, understanding what that means. Yeah, for sure. I think, there's a lot of folks in the SEO space in particular that have these kind of like arbitrary ideals, but then just can't translate that into anything that would be in any way measurable, right? And again, so a real example, I was on a project, this is years and years ago now, with an editorial team where we actually did a manual grading process. We created a rubric, right? We had these like 5 metrics, and it was like, readability, actionability, whatever. I can't remember the other ones. And we created this rubric, and then as a team, we fired up a spreadsheet, went down the list, one by one, clicked on the articles on those 5 metrics, graded them, 1 through 5. And then that became our kind of baseline. It was like, okay, so right now we're producing 30% of content that's like this level, 20% of content this level, and only like 10% of our content is meeting, what we thought was good quality, right? Like everyone agreed. So then, okay, today we're producing 10%. Our goal should be tomorrow, maybe 20% of content should meet our top quality threshold. But like, that's a way to translate, even though we did it by hand, right? We did it manually, we did it by eye. That's a way to translate content quality into something that's like a metric that we can measure and we can actually goal against and we can report on. And that's a much more pragmatic way of managing and far more likely to get resourcing and investment than just being like sitting there being like, I wish our content was better.
Yeah,
which I think a lot of folks are, candidly, like in the SEO space, they're just out there, throwing their hands in the air.
Yeah, Tom, I feel like I could talk forever, but got to be respectful of your time. I know you got some input metrics to go hit. So
yeah, sounds like you did too. So
yeah, that's true. So where should people find you? What's currently on your mind, and how can they get more of your great insights?
TomCritchlow.com is kind of my home base for my writing. I've also been putting more stuff on LinkedIn if you want to follow me there. And then the SEO MBA newsletter is kind of on a little bit of an extended hiatus, but the SEO MBA courses are still for sale. If anybody is interested, they're on the discount sale price. So SEOMBA.com, you can still grab the courses there and sign up. And they're all self-serve and self-paced, et cetera, et cetera. And they touch on what you so lovingly said was not a sexy topic of executive presence, executive communication. But I find that stuff important. I think it's important. So if you want to sign up,
it's more important than ever. So you should be tripling those prices, I think, Tom.
Yeah. I will do that right now. So buy it before I triple them on Ross's advice.
All right. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Ross. Appreciate it.